presentation tonight. So I hope y'all are as giddy as I am to get to the speaker. Is anyone new tonight? Okay, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Action Design, we're basically interested in promoting pro-social causes and healthy behaviors, just things that will help everyone just live a happier life. And rather than doing one-on-one coaching or anything along those lines, what we're really aiming to do is like harvest the best practices from behavioral science insights and apply those at scale to big problems. So if y'all have been to previous of our meetups, we've tackled everything from environmental issues to healthy behaviors to how you save money, and then also all of the little strategies of trying to scale, trying to understand what are those techniques that are going to help you move forward and actually achieve those goals. So we like to share a lot of frameworks within that kind of space. We are part of a larger organization. Action Design is a international organization. We've got 15 chapters now, and I'm really excited to say we now have a presence in Mexico City, that just came online. And we also have Melbourne, Australia just came online. So, if anyone's out traveling, throughout the United States or internationally, please, go to that Toronto meetup, go to New York City, seek us out. I'd like to thank some people. First off, Sparky Whitty, who's one of the meetup organizers, along with our founder, who couldn't be here tonight, but sends his regards, Robin Kriegelstein. And then I'd also like to thank our sponsors. Both Robin and Sparky work for Live Neuron Labs, and they're sponsoring tonight, along with Capital Factory, who provided this wonderful facility for us. They're allowing us to live stream the event so everyone can take advantage of that. And so just really excited about getting the chance to work in this beautiful facility here. If anyone is interested in sponsoring an event or sponsoring the group in a larger manner, we'd love to talk with you. If you've got if you're interested in speaking, please see either Sparky or I after the event. As far as a request on you guys, one thing that I'd love for everybody to do, and sorry, this is going to be the one, a little more painful part of the process for you guys tonight. Always trying to remove barriers, but if everyone could go to actiondesignatx.com/event sign in, or if you just want to go to actiondesignatx.com and click on the link, that may be even a little easier. If you could please just provide your name, email, and fill out that short form. Capital Factory likes us to keep attendance, and that's how we achieve that. And we promise not to spam anybody. We're just filling in a sign-in form that's didn't. We're not on silent meditation. Okay, we'll go ahead and push forward. Does anybody need an extra minute? We good? Okay. All right. Well, moving on to tonight's topic, I am super excited about this. This is really wonderful. What environmental psychology is difficult to study in an academic setting, so we're really excited to have people from a global architecture and design firm that have been, boots on the ground. I think it's a fascinating and often underweighted issue that what is going on in your immediate environment can have powerful effects on your behavior. And I'm very excited to get the opportunity to introduce our speaker tonight. Having studied at the Savannah College School of Design, a top design and architecture program, and who has had a breadth of experience starting in Washington, D.C., and having the chance to go through not only economic booms but also busts. So seeing what the impacts of that are on the architecture and design environment, and what that implies for everybody's general work environments. She has a wealth of experience there. She has been the studio leader at Gensler here in the Austin office, which is about 120 people, and has gotten a chance to work with very big accounts like Apple, Facebook. She is director of technology and workplace, and is now in charge of technology at Gensler for a worldwide scope. So very impressive pedigree. I'm fascinated to hear her insights. I'm very excited to introduce Nina Martin, and I'll turn it over from here.
Thank you. I guess we'll get started here. So just a very quick introduction about myself and what I've been up to, and thank you, Alan, for just giving a little bit of intel there. I've been doing this for over 25 years, and it's been just a wild ride. Really never thought that when you go to design school that you're there to, you think you're just going to be designing, but you're actually dealing with a lot of the people. The people aspect was kind of a surprise. So 25 years, been doing it. 19 years have been in the DC metro area, working with, the likes of General Dynamics, the State Department, a lot of the .com era folks that came and went, to a lot of startups actually, because in the DC metro market, you've got a lot of what they call the Silicon Corridor. And so I dealt with back in the 2000s, late 90s, with a lot of these startups. And they've actually, many of them have done so well, have been bought out and come and gone. And then, after 19 years, I moved to Austin with my husband. He is an Austinite, an original one. While we were dating in college, we would come to Austin and, he would say, "Do you want to move here?" And I said, "No, they don't have enough variety of food, But obviously, after 19 years, we were like, all right, let's go to Austin. It's happening. There's so much going on. So I've been practicing here in Austin for about 6 years now. I took a year and a half off with my kiddo and went back into workplace. And it's been fascinating because I started the whole technology experience, and being here, I never thought I was going to end up working with the likes of Google and Apple and Facebook and all those guys, but then at the same time working with a lot of startups. And so it's this dichotomy of complexities, really. So it's been a fun, wild ride, doing a variety of workspaces. And just a little bit about the company we work for, my team here, Gensler. We are a global company. We are the largest design firm in the world, with over 6,500 people and still growing. It's made up of architects, interior designers, graphic and brand designers, product designers, which is rather unique for a design firm to have a product designer, but it's wonderful when you can design the product and not just the space, right? And make it quite cohesive. And then we have a small team that does research for us. And so what's really kind of fascinating is that because we're so big and it's in a global scale, we've got so many projects and so much information. And so we started to keep all the data and tracking of all these projects. And so with Tableau and our research team, we've started to keep track of what's happening, not just in the workspace, but buildings and lifestyle, aviation, transportations of all types. So it's been this wonderful process and experience, and we can tap into it real time. So whenever we enter a project, as soon as we complete it, we're entering all the information of, how many workspaces, how many offices versus phone rooms and meeting rooms, and what's the daylighting like, what is the plumbing system like, what's the HVAC or the heating and ventilating. So it's wonderful that we can tap into that. And be able to utilize that information for us. So before I go to the next slide, I wanted to ask you guys, raise your hand if you have worked in an environment where it's just fluorescent lighting, it is just ugly ceiling tiles, right? Drab carpet, and you're just like, I am just not encouraged here. I just can't find the inspiration. So many of you have, right? So but that's changing. It's been changing, which is kind of wonderful. So because we're such a big company, we've got all this information, and every year, it used to be that we published the research about every 3 to 5 years, and now it's every year. And why? It's because of technology. Technology is just fueling the speed at which we're changing the workplace, and that has just affected it in so many other ways that we had no idea. So We've got the U.S. Workplace Survey. The new one is coming out in about 3 weeks. You can tap into the Gensler website and look and see what some of the benchmarking has as far as like ratios per square foot, what the financial services and professional services, law firms, what are those ratios and requirements, and how technology has a completely different ratio. So it's really fascinating work. And this is just an example of, some of the research that we do, and then the data that goes into it. This is a project we did, and you see all the different colors, how it highlights some of the meeting spaces, and you start to see the different ratios, and support spaces, amenity spaces, which I'll get into it in a little bit later. Really fascinating stuff. So before we get into the workplace and what's going on currently, I think it's really important to go back and look at what's happened in the past, century, and how the workplace really got started right after the Industrial Revolution. And so you look at the 20s. In the 20s, it was just, there's a lot going on with prohibition and everything. So it started to really influence the way we worked. And at that time, you had very small offices, and it was really about clerk work and post offices and things like that. And those spaces were really drab, were very small. There was not a lot to them. And then as you go into the 40s, you really start to develop better lighting. Fluorescent lighting came into play. And, it started to grow, and they started to have big, bulky desks throughout their spaces. And just, it was a lot of men. Women weren't necessarily in those environments. Maybe they were off to the side being, secretaries and so forth. And then, as time went by in the 50s, you had this major influx of work and need for not just men, but women post World War II. And so it started to really affect how we worked. And as you can see here, a depiction of that workspace. I mean, it's like unbelievable, right? Just imagine working in an environment like that with the big clunky desk. And the hierarchy was really prominent. You had the big bosses all along the window line with their windows. Everybody else was in the center. So there was that sense. And then you had the women on doing clerical work off to the side. So kind of fascinating there. And then you get into, the 50s, 60s, the influence and the change and the growth. And you really, during the 60s, it's amazing how the culture of what's happening during that decade has such influence on not just the workplace, but everything else that it touches, right? And so you had this moment of love and, everything was free love, right? And then you start to have a reaction into the 70s, of the disco era, and so how that affects the workspace is really interesting. This is in the 60s is the first time that you get the cubicle as we know it today, and so tall cubicles, everybody just crammed into the space. And the biggest thing that came out of the 50s was that now that we've got fluorescent lighting, we've got air conditioning, let's just cram it. We've got so much happening. It's a major boom right in the economy, and so there's people everywhere just crammed in spaces. And then, you get into sort of the Mad Men times where you've got the perimeter offices, the big dudes have their nice swanky offices, everybody else is in the center space. The top right photo is actually one of our spaces that we designed back in the day. So it just kind of shows you those lovely lamps and the angle walls. Then you get into the 80s, and this is, I remember distinctly in the 80s how during those times, it was also a reaction of what was happening in the 70s, right? It was like a sort of anger. We're not going to take it. I remember that song as a little kid singing it. And also a reaction to the disco era, right? And that life of exuberance. And, colors were everywhere. It was just all this brightness. And we start to see in the 80s, phones coming into play, the big block phones. And so that starts to affect how the workplace, works in terms of technology, accessibility. And you've got that famous photo of Michael Douglas there with the very swanky offices. And so what's happening in the workplace, you've got more offices and everybody wants to be in an office. So you've got some issues. And that actually started to happen in the 70s where everybody wanted to have an office, a windowed office. So you start to look at architecture. You see a lot of buildings that are very long and skinny. And it was because you flanked offices on either side with these corridors. That wasn't very effective at all. People were in their offices. The culture wasn't really happening. So cubicles are still happening in the 80s, obviously, with really tall heights, and disruption of acoustical properties are an issue. And also collaboration is next to nil because everybody's in their offices or in their cubes all working down, so it's not very conducive to collaboration. And so then you get to the 90s, you got the big, continuing with the block phones, and they're getting smaller. Again, another reaction to the culture of what was happening during the 80s, right? You got grunge now, no more of this big hair bands with the glam rock or whatever. And then technology is now really pushing the way we work, right? Just access to the mobile phones towards the 90s. You remember I got my first phone, it was in the 90s, and being able to make have phone calls from different locations. And you start to see people walk away from that office space, being able to work in different work environments, as you can see in this photo in the 90s. Now, what happened in the 90s was really fascinating. The dot-com era really came into play, right, with the internet. And they started to notice, hey, you know what? There's an impact that we're creating into these employees, and how do we attract the best talent? Companies like Google and Yahoo, we're just beginning and realizing we need to make these spaces brighter, so splashes of color start to appear, even like technology in terms of everybody having their computers, it starts to proliferate. Technology is really making a big difference. And of course, there's great movies from those days. And then you get into the 2000s, technology is widespread. Everybody's got a computer at home now. You've got Wi-Fi, you've got mobility. Post the 90s, you had the dot-com boost. And so what that caused is a lot of folks working from different spaces and telecommuting, because companies realize, hey, there's some savings here. We don't have to, in terms of operating costs, have all these people here. Let them work from home, and let's see how that works. And, it started to take off at that time. And then, the 2000s, it just continued to proliferate, this idea of technology being right at your hand. iPods and the overall use of smartphones really developed during this time. And, the Googles and the Teslas, actually, they all were like, wow, we got to make these spaces just fabulous, Let's add some slides, let's add the coffee break room. And what's interesting is what started to happen, and I was full on working with companies, is that a lot of landlords were saying, okay, tech company, startup, we're going to let you have all your angle walls, your bright green walls, and your climbing wall, but you need to retrofit it back to how you found it originally. And so that became like this point of contention, and boom, 1999, 2000, the dot-com era, it was amazing. It just happened so suddenly. What also starts to happen in the workplace is you have that mobility, and people are starting to work from different parts of their space, whether it's a break area, a lounge. And then we get to the last decade, the 2000 or the 20-teens, and there's this idea of co-working spaces. I mean, Austin, I feel like, was one of the top ones, in California, of course, in New York. And everybody wants to have these co-working spaces. Look at WeWork, how well they had done. And we'll see what happens in the future. And then, just the mobility aspect is huge, and how the space is really being affected. And people starting to realize, I don't need to be tied down to this desk. I could actually walk away and be on the balcony or, the cafe, maybe downstairs somewhere else. And so we start to think and look at it in a different approach. And, here are the 20-teens, late teens. We just wrap them up, right? And the idea of creating an environment with flexibility, with a variety of work styles is key. And then you also have the implementation of digital design, where you're working with technology to create an experience through the space. That's huge, right? And open work styles and different working spaces are key. So we know that technology is rapidly changing how we're working, right? And it's the way we think and how we innovate. And that is just affecting everybody. It all started with, ad agencies or technology companies, and then it started to move on to consumer products, onto real estate, publishing, engineer, biotech, and then, finance and professional services, law firms, basically. A year ago, we did a project where not one of the attorneys was in an office. That is like epic because you usually have this hierarchy of the partner and the different partners and everybody else. And so that's changed. And of course, the government, the last adopter. So again, data is just happening so quickly and so rapidly. It's changing the way we do things and also how it affects us in a mental aspect. Another way that it's being disruptive is, the back in 2015, look at the percentage of ride sharing. And now we're expecting that by 2025, it's going to be such a huge percentage. It's just unbelievable. Who would have thought that 10 years ago we would have had this thing that would just pick you up and take you wherever you wanted to go? It's incredible. So this leads us to know and understand that innovation is important. Innovation is critical to a company. And, look what happened to these folks. I mean, they were at the top of their game at some point in their lives, and their duration. And I mean, even Yahoo, it's like, wow, look at that. I remember Tower Records when we got one near our neighborhood, and I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. It's the best thing, buy CDs, compact discs for those. Yeah. So the tech sector, it's a changing paradigm, how things are really drastically affecting the way that we work every day. Before it was really task-driven, and then it was about this collaboration and task-driven combined. And now it's really about a shared purpose. It's about, are we creating a space that's going to inspire folks? And what is that purpose? What is the intent? Whenever we start projects, we always talk about, what is the mission? What is your goal as a company? And we go through this complete strategic process to understand what makes that company tick and what is the goal, so that when we're designing the space, we're aligning with, the design aligns with that goal. And, we know that people plus interaction and collaboration equals innovation. And so we have this proven with a lot of the data and the research that we have done. In the office, we know as the old office, it's completely obsolete. You're not going to walk into that type of old space. Even landlords that do spec office, they no longer are requiring the same things they used to 10, 15 years ago. They're looking at the amenity space as what can we do? It's no longer the gym in the basement. It's now the gym on the main floor or in a top floor, so you have access to, daylighting and outdoor views. And, one thing we have come to realize and understand is that, the top companies in the world really are doing so well because they have certain attributes, and it's really related to the culture, the space, the interaction, and ultimately the behavior. And within those parameters, each one has certain elements that they follow, and that's what makes them successful, right? And so you've got higher employee engagement and ultimately better business performance, right? And so when we get into the spaces and we dive deep into what are some of the details and the kinds of spaces that make a difference, it's all about creating spaces that are creating that connectivity. It's a different work style, different mode, so you have a moment or a meetup moment, and now you're thinking differently, right? You're no longer at your desk and you have to get up and talk to someone or create a meeting. No, you're actually creating these impromptu moments. It's so important for interior design nowadays to have different types of working styles. So some folks like to, one-on-one. Others like to go sit on the couch and just brainstorm. Of course, it all depends on what type of company you are. For technology, collaboration is key, right? But there are maybe other ones that are not necessarily in need of this. And so there's a lot of papers out there that are the controversy of, does open workspace actually work? And there has been so many white papers written on this and controversial, but if you really, haven't been throughout the last few decades and gone through it, it's really depending on the culture of the company and the needs and what they do as a business. Just because everyone's having the open benching, it doesn't mean that you necessarily need to do that for your company, So we have to think about all those parameters and the needs. And then, again, it's about that balance, the open space and enclosed spaces. Is there a nice balance? Is that what really this company needs? So we have to think about those parameters and how they impact the employees. And so the higher the collaboration, the happier people are. And those are different elements that we have to think about when we're designing these spaces. Power of choices. So, it's no longer you have the conference room and the break area. It's really about other spaces. What can we do? You'll see in a later slide that outdoor spaces are really key. And for Austin, Texas, my gosh, there's not a client that now is like, I want a balcony, I want a deck. I want people to go out there and work in those spaces. And here's a little stat: 49% of employees without work choice, when they do have that choice, they report a greater, they enjoy it more. So it's a better experience. And one of the other things that we're finding out that big floor plates are back in vogue. And the reason for the bigger floor plates is because you've got, you create a flatter hierarchy, right? And you also are creating deeper footprints, and it allows room for vertical circulation, stairs, and brighter spaces, taller, so you're not in this stuffy, shorter, small box of a space. And so, as you can see here, Facebook, NVIDIA, and Apple, which we've worked with all these guys, Facebook headquarters in Menlo Park, it's basically the length, that entire building is the length of the Empire State Building, but laying on its, and it's only 2 floors. Now, the 2 floors are raised, and the first floor is all parking. But what's lovely is that above the 2 floors, the 3rd floor, the roof, it's an entire green park. You can actually do picnics, you can skate. It's amazing. And those vertical penetrations happen throughout the space. NVIDIA, you'll see a picture here. It's different, right? You've got all this access to natural light. It's just such a dynamic space, and that's what a lot of these companies are looking for. Here you see how these larger footprints and vertical penetrations really make a big impact. They create this connection and moments where, you have a little social moment or collaborative moment. And that's really key. And so if you start to look at all the local firms here, or the tech firms, so Atlassian, they've got an interconnecting stair. Google has it. Apple has it. Facebook has it. I'm thinking of all the projects that we have done, and they all have it. And why? It's because people will use it, actually, and will circulate through the floor plate and create this collaborative moment versus just getting back on the elevator and going down. So it really changes the way we move. Again, curating those encounters. The other asset or trend that we see, and it's been here for a while, is really about the amenities. As your floor plate starts to shrink in your per square foot area, you've got, 150 square feet in technology. And when it comes to financial and professional services, it's bigger, about 200 or so. People are demanding to have a variety of spaces. And so you're looking at maker space and outdoor spaces, phone rooms, conference and huddle rooms, and different types of lounges to just provide alternative solutions. And then share amenities, that's huge. It's really about coming together, creating this social interaction, and that boosts morale. And in terms of outdoor spaces, it really creates this innovation, where people are brainstorming ideas. And so this is actually Silicon Labs here in Austin. We added this outdoor space to, you know, enhance the space. They have a ton of engineers there. They were in these little tiny offices with glass walls. So as you walk down the hallway, they all looked like they were in the individual glass bowls. It was just fascinating. We took them out of that and put them in the open. And I mean, there's been a drastic change with them. So, you know, there's that increased demand for exterior spaces. And so if you look around all the new buildings, they all have some sort of balcony. You know, 500 West 2nd, where Google is, that has outdoor, and all the new ones that are coming up. We're doing the 6 and Guad right there on, it's a big hole right now, but it's coming up. It's 66 stories. We have residential and work. There are balconies, and there are huge amenity areas with, you know, restaurants and everything. So, I mean, my God, it's almost like you want to live there, you know. That's scary, though. Again, the workspace, you know, outdoor spaces, creating these sort of residential style environments is key. You've heard of residential, probably. And that's really to create that comfort level. So now you're at work, but you're feeling comfortable. So it's really, you know, an important. And why all of this, you know? It's really about retaining clients and retaining your employees, the talent, and especially in Austin. It's so competitive here. The same Googles and Apples and the startups, everybody is fighting for that same programmer. It's just unbelievable. Again, another shot. This is Netflix, California, so neat space. And again, that was kind of my point, is really our people at the center of it. And, you know, how do you keep and retain talent? It's critical. And again, people are the most expensive aspects of any company, right? Instead of, you know, the building or the facilities and then technology after that, but it's really the people. That's what's expensive for any company. So how do you create an environment that's conducive for not only their enjoyment of at the office, but really about producing and creating and innovating? And wellness, that's a big one. That's a huge trend that has been here for quite some time. And it's not just, you know, the ergonomics like back in the day. Oh, you've got to have the right chair, you've got to have the right desk, and you know, you're good to go, and you've got accessibility into the building, you know. No longer that's enough. It's really about the wellness and the comfort, what your lighting is like, you know, having that warmer tone of light. It's also about when you've got bright light outside, the sunshine is piercing in, you know, making sure that the space is actually getting darker. So adjustable daylighting inside the space. And then a huge one now is really about mechanical systems and what is in the air that you're breathing. How's that affecting your allergies, you know? When was the last time they cleaned that HVAC system right above you, you know? And what does that have? And so having the accessible windows for fresh air, that's where outdoor spaces come into play. And so having access to outdoor views is just so important. It reduces stress, and there's plenty of data backing that. People feel better, and you know, they always talk about creativity. If you're a creative individual and you're stuck at a moment, get up from wherever you are, walk around the building, walk outside, and just take a breather, and you'd be amazed how that creativity sort of comes back. And that's plenty of research on that. And, you know, with a more green space in terms of the wellness of people, you know, they're going to have less ailments, they're going to have less, you know, missed sick days, and ultimately they're going to be happier. Biophilia. I don't know if everybody's familiar with biophilia, but that's mimicking nature. Biomimicry is the other one that's really mimicking and bringing nature inside the space. And it's not just about throwing a bunch of plants inside. It's really about imitating what nature does, and it's creating these fractal patterns. It's actually been known that it helps your eyes to just ease and reduce stress. So that's why you're seeing now a lot of spaces just covered with green and just creating these different patterns. But it's not just the greenery. You could have different patterns that help to relieve that type of stress. And, you know, the place is just thinking about creating a space with branding in mind. That's huge in the workspace nowadays. It's really about combining the culture of that company, the people, and creating this authentic environment. It's really becoming about that. This is Etsy in New York, and was a very neat project where it wasn't just about biophilia, but also about art and how you implement art and branding and a variety of elements just coming together. So it's this really, I mean, how many other spaces look like that? It's probably just them, you know, very unique and authentic spaces. These are photos of just a variety of projects that we have done in the area. And what's great about these is really thinking again about the art and how you implement the art and combine it as part of the design and creating branding, you know, digital design. We have a whole team that does digital designs, huge walls with screens that interact with you. We just won an award for the ACK Pet Museum in New York City. And it's very cool. We have these mirrors or these screens that you go up to it and you push a button and it starts to read your face and it'll spit out what type of dog you are. It's really, really cool. It's addicting because you want to do it a couple of times. And believe it or not, I got a Boston Terrier and I have a Boston Terrier. So I was like, this is good. And then thinking about the materials, materiality is really important. It's no longer these bright, crazy colors. It's really thinking about bringing nature back in, softer colors. These are easier on the eyes, and this has a huge effect. And that's why you see in Austin this idea of, you know, wood, mesquite wood, burnt wood, just bringing into the space and creating patterns, whether you're using your front desk or a whole wall, but it's just changing things up, you know, forget the wall covering, or maybe you do, but maybe you can't afford it. So you have to think of creative ways of maybe there's some reclaimed wood that somebody has that you can utilize and turn it into something creative. And then, you know, just thinking about creating a space that is conducive of that culture. That is so key. These days, innovation is just so important. And then the last few months have been just amazing. Maybe I should say since last fall, all our clients are asking us about gender neutral bathrooms. And so this is really a big trend that we see. Even if you're going into your typical spec building, actually in the Frost Hour, we have a client that asked us, hey, will you take a look at those core bathrooms? We would like to turn them into full stalls so that men and women can share them and just move the sinks out in a more common sort of way. I was thinking, that's like the old nightclubs, or, you know, clubs that you go in New York or wherever. It's amazing how that's really changing about the way we think about bathrooms. It's no longer really like his and hers, right? I think the W has those bathrooms too here. And ultimately, all these different spaces, what is it about? It's really about retaining talent. It's really about making people happy, right? And if they're happy, they're producing, they're creating great work. That means the company is going to do well as well. So it's really sort of tying all of this in and having this purpose. It's no longer about that task, hey, clock in, clock out. It's really about doing something meaningful and having that space and that company represent that aspect. So just thought it was kind of a cool little quote here about, you know, you take care of your employees and they'll take care of the clients. And so kind of a cool quote, right? So that's all I had, folks. Thank you. I know there's some questions, maybe. Anyone? Lauren, you want to give them the phone?
This is working. My question is, you know, you go through the decades and, you know, we can all look back at some of the, now they're obviously dated, but you talked a lot about culture and how, you know, the culture and the technology of the time influences that.
Right.
And so do you think that today, you know, obviously today we're also being, you know, design is influenced by our culture and our technology, but it also sounded like, you know, maybe we're smarter about some things, that we're making maybe less mistakes or making more truly productive or human-friendly spaces. Can you talk a little bit about
Sure.
what kind of research or data you guys use to do that?
So, you know, in the data and all the information that we've been able to gather, it's really about different generations too that are in the workplace. So you've got 4 of them. And what the boomers want compared to the Gen Z is completely different, right? And so that's been at the forefront of changing a lot of things in the last two decades, right? I mean, the Gen Xers, I'm a Gen Xer, and we were like, party hard, work hard, right? And then came the millennials. They were like, I don't want to party hard. I want to chill out in my parents' basement, you know? And so you had a different mindset. And then you get into the next generation, right? And they're actually the ones that are really pushing for this natural approach, authentic approach to things. And they're okay with it. You know, if I would have thought that, like myself at 20, I was not thinking in those terms. And so we do have enough evidence showing that folks are happier in a space where they have a purpose, right? I think before we were really, you know, and especially like my mother's 84 years old, and it was a different mentality. You came in, you did a good job, and, you know, you're going to get rewarded for it. But as time went by, you know, you might have done a great job, but okay, so, you know, the company's not doing well, so sorry, we're going to lay you off. So I think there's this combination of psychology happening, and also climate change is affecting how we think about things. Right? And they're the ones that are really pushing it. You know, to me, it's just amazing. It's like Greta, you know, she got out there and really stirred up a lot of things, and it makes us think about it, right? I've got a 6.5-year-old where I have to think, what's he going to encounter if we're having problems, you know, respiratory problems all the time. My dog is now on medication for allergies. He's allergic to everything. You know, I don't remember ever having to deal with that as a kid. And so I think climate change, technology, and this sense of well-being is really pushing all those different things. Does that make sense? Yeah. And we have at Gensler, if you just get on the website, we've got the 2019 research that hits on all those aspects, and take a look at it. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
So I would have to assume that not every landlord or every company could afford hiring Gensler or afford building a fabulous spec suite.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any recommendations for those companies who are just getting started, they have a tight budget, who maybe want to implement some of these things that where their employees will benefit?
Sure.
But
So let me correct you on that. We work with startups. You know, it's really setting the expectations and understanding what your goals are. Just because you don't have the $150 a square foot or the $200 or the $250 that some of these big time, you know, tech companies have, it doesn't mean that, you know, whatever allowance you get from your landlord, that we can't work with that budget. In fact, we actually welcome it, because you've got a bigger challenge for us to come up with designs at a cost effective, you know, at a budget. It's more interesting, actually. And I've worked with, you know, there's one just up the street, I won't say who they were, but they were like, no, we want to look like Google. And I'm like, oh man, all right, let's see what we can do here. And we just got really creative on how we use color, how we use brand, and where we had a little bit of money, let's put it in spaces that are going to have a higher impact with your employee in your group. And so it's really about getting creative. So don't think that just because we're this massive company, we still work with the 5,000 square foot spaces and the smaller tenants, because we get so much more intelligence and data out of that too. So it's really about just getting creative. And for me, it's all about, you know, if you want Gensler, you know, ask the world and you're going to get Gensler, you know, somehow. So that's, I think there's opportunities. And yes, there are some landlords that are very limiting. So you just have to find the ones that are willing to do it. On the east side, there are so many great little landlords that have, you know, unique spaces, like the Upcycle building. You guys have probably seen it. We did that, and it was a warehouse, you know. Again, it's just about being creative and using that budget go a long way.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Sure, back there.
Thank you. And thank you so much for speaking today. This is wonderful. I was curious if you could actually speak a little bit about innovations in accessibility. Some of the things, like this is very environmental related, maybe it's technology, maybe it is environmental, but I'm just kind of curious what some of the things you're doing.
And are you talking about accessibility into the buildings and how that works, or accessibility?
Even in collaboration spaces. So you talked about how you're creating these interaction points, or like on stairs, or just these very large floor formats, which I could see as a challenge for someone with maybe mobility issues, but not necessarily. Maybe there are other things you're doing. So I'm just curious if you could speak to that.
Sure. So, when we're designing a space, we're thinking about accessibility. You can't design something without that accessibility in mind, right? But a lot of times we're thinking about how to create creative ramps, to get to a space. You do have the access to elevators. But in reality, there's ways to make it happen. My kiddo's got a muscular disability, and I know that in the future he's going to have challenges. So for me, it's really important to think about how space is accessed. But in America, we actually do an amazing job with that. Where, when I travel through Europe or China or South America, my God, there's you're out of luck if you're in a wheelchair, if you have any kind of mobility challenges. It's amazing how long it's taken, but they're not there yet. But we're really pushing that. And so all spaces have to be accessible. I'm trying to think of one that we didn't have it, but you had to. Even if you have a stage, you have to have a ramp. If it's more than 8 inches, you've got to have it. 6 inches, actually. So does that answer your question?
Sort of. I was wondering if maybe even like some of the technology, if you have any sort of influence in that, sort of like accessible meeting spaces, or...
that's a huge aspect, right? Every space has some sort of scheduler, but meeting rooms and the ability to have screens. Everybody has cameras these days. And in fact, all tech firms these days have a way to have a meeting without actually having to be there in the space, right? So I feel like technology has also helped a lot in that. Yeah, so, yes.
You made a comment that the open office concept is controversial.
Yes, there's been a lot of paper. They're saying that, so it's controversial because they're saying that open office spaces are disruptive. It's too loud. The acoustics don't work. People can't concentrate. If you're a high producer, somebody who's always, very intense and doing a multitasking, although multitasking doesn't work, it takes 15 minutes for that person to actually get back to focusing. And so the challenges with open desking is really that you have to think, number one, does that actually fit the culture of the company? Number two, what are the needs of, maybe it's just one department that needs that sort of collaborative open area. And then number three, you have to create different environments in different neighborhoods. Just think of a city, right? A city, you've got different neighborhoods that offer different things and how you navigate through that, right? And so it's the same thing with an office space. You create different neighborhoods. And instead of having this massive open work area, you now have flanked maybe a couple of meeting rooms and phone rooms on one side. And then you get to your next space, and maybe that area is just little seating areas and couches. And then you get to another row of meeting rooms, conference rooms, and you get to another space that's completely different. So now you're curating this experience of different spaces and different neighborhoods, and you can address the acoustics. So that's why, there's a lot of naysayers that people are just not happy. But there's plenty of data proving that it does, actually. I couldn't think myself of not working with the team. That's how you learn. When I started in the early days, that's how I learned about architecture and how to design and codes, when you would hear somebody else telling somebody else, oh, wait a minute, I didn't know about that. And so I think there's always going to be controversy about that, Some folks love to kind of stir it up. But I think it all depends on how you design it. You know, it's not a one size fits all.
All right. I appreciate your comments on that, and I agree with them largely. You know, having been in Austin for quite a while, worked at a number of different companies, starting out, you know, with a very traditional cubicle type of thing, which pretty much persists still today. Yeah. I found that having the different spaces was really key, because a lot of collaboration took place, but it didn't take place when you were at your desk.
Right. You have to.
It took place in the cafeteria, where people would get together and they'd play dominoes and cards, and then they would share their ideas while they were, you know, looking at their cards.
Yeah.
And some of the best ideas that came out of Motorola were in the hallways.
On a napkin.
Yeah, on a napkin.
Yeah.
And at lunch. So, but what I find in these open offices, if that's all you have, then people get very protective about their personal space.
Right.
You know, their bubbles get bigger, and they actually get kind of cranky if you approach them with a question or whatever, because it's just so much of it. It becomes irritating. And
that's, you know, I think what happens to companies are looking at a way to maximize their return. So you're not going to put everybody in offices. That's, you know, that's more drywall, that's more studs, that's mechanical units separating and providing all the infrastructure. So open spaces are actually more cost effective. And that's greatly affected, you know, by, you've got other benefits too, the daylighting, people are happier. But in terms of this open area just being a one size fits all, it doesn't. And yes, acoustically, it's a problem. So one thing that you guys, you know, we run into this, all the tech firms and startups, they want open ceilings, no ceilings, just like here. But I can point out that this has Sonos spray, and that adds to the cost. And then I'm sure there's some other spaces that probably have acoustical panels, and it's because now noise or sound is reverberating back and forth. And so you have to add acoustical panels. Well, guess what? Acoustical panels are expensive. So you have to go through that entire process. And also your HVAC, this one's externally wrapped, but there's different types of, like a spiral type of ductwork, you know, does it have a double wall for acoustics? And what you don't see, it's what's inside of it. And so you think, well, I want this spiral ductwork that looks really cool, industrial looking. Yeah, but how's that going to affect your acoustics? So we have to ask these questions to make sure they're aware of that. Yeah, so creating different workspaces. And do you know that when you have taller cubicles, you tend to speak louder? When you have just benching and just regular workstations, you get quieter because you're mindful of somebody listening. So there's that little psychological aspect that people don't realize. But when you had taller cubes, people were just so loud, you know. Yeah. Any other questions over there?
Yeah, also related to the thank you. Sort of related to that topic, you mentioned when you were talking about open floor plans that there was a perception at one time that open floor plans help flatten the hierarchy of an organization. And you were talking also about this shift between like having everybody in an open system and the single use office as a kind of a symbol of status of like, I've made it if I have that my own office. I'm wondering what kind of research you've done into that, because I have a hunch that it doesn't, that it pretends to flatten the hierarchy, but that a lot of other factors have to do with the hierarchy than just an open floor plan.
So, you know, like I'll even speak to our office. Mostly everybody is in open desks, but those that are in offices are just a few. They're principals and they're having those private conversations. Now, do I agree that they should be in those offices? Probably not. But it does, you still have to have that differentiator, maybe not managers, but it's maybe an owner, it's a C-suite that you typically want to be separated. I'm trying to think of a C-suite that wasn't out in the open. Actually, Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg is outside. But what's interesting, he's outside, but he always goes back into his conference room to have calls and meetings. So is that really his office? Probably, right? But for the most part, if you saw some of the slides, you know, in the 40s and 50s and 60s, I mean, it was just, you know, the C-suite, not just the C-suite, but all the hierarchy was in enclosed offices. And everybody else was in the bullpen. And I mean, and that went through even as far as the 90s, you know. It's until the 2000s that we start to see that change and going, wait a minute, you can have internal offices wrapped around the core with glass walls. You can see and have access to outdoor views, but then your staff is also able to have that. And so now everybody's happy. You've got your enclosed office, but you've got others in the open area, but everybody gets to have that access to that natural light. And that's so important. Yeah. Pass the micro around.
Thank you so much for
Sure.
this insight. I have dabbled, I'm an interior designer, so I've dabbled a little bit in Gensler's research, and it's fantastic. I do have one question, and I'm curious if you guys have been learning about this and tinkering in that space. Not having a home base in an office.
Oh,
or
yes.
having
Oh, my gosh, yes.
Not having a space.
So-
I don't know if the Dallas office is working on it or has done it, but curious.
They, for the most part, our New York City office, over 100 people in that office. How's that? Oh,
Nope.
came back on. Just, and they are the majority. It's free address, and people are getting used to it. It's hard at first. So we're about to move in about 4 weeks to a new office right on South Congress, Music Lane. The building's being done, and for the leadership, we're not going to have a desk, which is interesting. It's kind of the other way around, right? All the designers and architects, project architects, they are all going to have their desks. But all the leadership, all the studio directors, design directors, we're all not going to have a home. And I kind of love it because for me, I come in and I deal with, 25 people, and I'm sitting at their desk. Hey, how's this going? How are we working this out? And then I'll go to the next one, or I'll be in meetings all day. So it is challenging. It's human nature not to want to change, but how you approach it and what type of amenities you give them. If you give them this wonderful, cafe and workspace that is, conducive to a variety of working styles, it makes a big difference. But it is challenging. I'm not denying it. Yeah. I know there's a question over there.
Yeah, so you told this story of kind of the progression of different office spaces through time, and finished with these really cool, 21st century Google and Facebook, and the examples that you used were kind of the headquarters. So I'm just kind of curious if these designs are about attracting talent when it's, in these very competitive markets, if you see these kind of benefits being shared with lower paid employees and other sectors as well, or is this kind of just like a fun little playground for like the headquarters?
Sure. No, I think it's broad. Here in Austin, you've got, again, you're competing for the same talent, the software developers, engineers. And so I've done other companies in town where they didn't have the budgets. And so, again, the designs were really aimed to attract new talent and retain their current, right? So it's not just the HQs. I actually had some other ones of like San Antonio, Hulu, and a variety of other spaces. So we work with a lot of HQs, but we also work with a lot of, one-offs as well. So I think, clients are asking for a lot more. Even if they're on a budget, they are asking for a lot more because their employees are asking for more. They want more. So there's this, you just can't avoid it, right? So it's happening to not just the C-suite or the Googles of the world, right? Even in the financial aspect, fintech, professional services. It's all going in that direction, having the space that's authentic, that has more meaning, and people want to come into work. So.
Can you think offhand of any educational institutions, be they higher ed, universities, colleges, or even K through 12, that are moving in this direction? Perhaps not including, say, the university that dumps $100 million into some student activity center or stadium. Not that, but just more widespread adoption of the things that you're talking about tonight.
Absolutely. I mean, even if you're not a university, if you're a Montessori school, I've actually done quite a few Montessoris in the DC metro area. And if you look locally, there's the Rise School, and that school was done about, I want to say 6 years ago. And that's a state of the art. And it's cool. It's got the technology aspect, but it's also the design. The design is so well thought out. I don't even know who designed it, but it's got every single classroom has big, windows looking at the gardens. There's an area for the kiddos to go play and do their gardening. There's an area for playing. There's an area for science outdoor. There's a music room, but they're being done in a way. I mean, gosh, if I would have gone to a school like that, just the creativity as a kid, just amazing. And so natural light is really key. And then implementing it, all the classrooms had drop-down screens. Actually, the one was interactive, and I'm thinking, wow, they've got the deep pockets, to do that. So schools, not just colleges, are thinking about that. Now, do those counties, like you've got AISD and you've got Eanes. Eanes has deep pockets, and so their schools are state-of-the-art. So that is influenced by the local level, right? But does everybody want to improve it? Absolutely. They're aware of it. Yeah. Has a huge effect on their children. I think we've got a question over there.
I'd like to see an example. ECC has just redone all of the Highland Mall into their campus.
We're working on that, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so a lot of the things that you were showing us show up in their
Yeah. Again, it's being pushed by, the different generations wanting something unique and different. So.
They actually hold classes in their big computer lab. So there'd be like 10 different classes going on in that space.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. That's cool. No, it's a great time to be in design, just being really creative. It's also a super competitive moment. So there's a lot of really great firms out there.
As you were talking, I thought about some of the elements are also in one of the newest HEB Digital. Did you have an impact on that design?
I don't think we did that one. No. Oh, that's right. Well, so okay, yep. It's the interior design was done by somebody else, but I'm good friends with him. I know how. Yeah, that was HEB and Favor came together under one roof, and they did a very similar thing. It was all about, I read the article, they went back to the past of who HEB was, and then they developed, they brought in some of the old cashier and some different elements that had been stored in storage for a long time and created the space. And it also had to reflect the east side, Right now we're doing the 6 and Onion building. There's a big hole there. That building is going to be so cool. It's a warehouse looking type building, 2 buildings with a courtyard in the center, and it's at an angle, because of what's happening with the landscape there. And it reminds me of what is that street in San Francisco with the yes. And there is this landscaping that's really wonderful, and they've already leased one of the buildings, and it hasn't even broke ground. It's another tech firm that's in town, and they're going to move there. But it's wonderful how, they're thinking about that. And they also said, and as I met the guys, we don't want a space that looks like a glass, tower. We don't want downtown Austin. We want East Side Austin because it's so much more cool, It's like, okay. I mean, I love the East Side, so.
And besides that, do you also work with art facilities?
Sure. I mean, we there's plenty of consultants in the area, but a lot of the companies, depending on who you are, will have a group of consultants, art consultants that are within, or like they call them art residents. Like Facebook has that, and they have them so that they're hiring the local talent, which is cool, I think. Instead of bringing somebody from New York, they're hiring local people. And a lot of the other tech firms are doing the same thing. Maybe not Apple. Apple's got their, like, you know, as I call it, the Darth Vader photos with the iPhone enlarged, really beautifully photographed, but it's very clean, and that's their brand, right? So it works for them.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi.
Hi
Thanks
there.
for your time tonight. It was
Sure.
a great presentation and really good visuals. You mentioned the vast amount of data you have access to based on volume of jobs. I'm curious what your research looks like on an individual job level. For example, like how many stakeholders are you talking to that are using the facilities? Are those like all levels of people? Are you doing observational interviews or contextual inquiry?
Sure. So when we start up a project, we have this form. It's called Smart Start. And that's where we start to put in all the information about the client. And then we start to add in, you know, the programming aspects and requirements of that client. And then we hold all those interviews, and that information gets stored in that. And as you progress throughout the project, that information gets, you know, input into this database. And then it's Tableau that we work with. And so, you know, you get the call, hey, you guys are done with this project. Please finish it up. Let us know, you know, what you ended up with, how many phone rooms and break rooms and amenity spaces. Now, there are some clients that will go as far as creating, they have sensors throughout the space that will monitor the daylighting and the occupants in that space. And that's really cool, right? Because you start to understand that people want to be in a sunny spot, right? They don't want to be in the dark little room unless you're a programmer, right? You want your space to be dark. It's so funny. You put lights and they're all turned off or blocked off. So we've, you know, now we're designing smarter where, you know, your light switches and your LED lighting, you know, you can have a fluctuation of, depending on the time of the day, you know, different day lighting. And so it can go from like a cooler tone to a warmer tone. And that has come down in pricing exponentially. So LED lighting is the way to go. No more fluorescent. That's just not the way to go. And never mind incandescent. But so we do have all that data entry, and it'll spit out like a report, you know, and you can do comparisons because we have, so in the workplace at Gensler, we have so many different practice areas. So you've got the financial services, you've got workplace, professional services, you've got not sports, but consumer media, civic, I mean, a whole host, right? And so you start to compare, depending on what company, you know, what your background is, with other ones and how you fit. So it's always fascinating. Of course, the attorneys are always the ones like, how do we compare with the other firms? You know, that's the first thing you want to know. What's the square footage? How, you know, what are they getting? What are the partners getting? So it's really cool. We can go in there and spit it out. So if you're curious about something, we have that, all that information. And we actually conduct, it's called a WPI. It's the Work Performance Index. And you go through a whole series of questions when you're starting the project, and you meet with the different department heads, everyone. And once you get that information, it gets put in, and it'll spit out a report that will compare how you ranked in comparison to all these top firms or companies around the world, that we use them as the sort of guiding, you know, reference. Yeah, we're actually going through that right now with a company, a financial one that wanted to do that. So it's pretty cool. I mean, when I joined Gensler, I was just blown away at the research. And there's a few others that may be doing, but it's just when you get to that scale, you know, and I'm connecting with folks in Shanghai, easy, like on an afternoon, you know, it's usually late at night that we connect, or if I'm talking to the West Coast, you know, it's different times, and we get on because I just became the technology practice co-leader, it's global aspects. So we're connecting with Shanghai, Bangalore, all these folks around the world, and we do that call at 8:30 in the morning to try to. And then some people are about to go to bed, or the other ones are getting up really early to be on the call. As far as Australia as well, so it's so cool to have those resources. And I always say we're only 120. 120 is not very big as a firm. So I always say we're a boutique firm with global reach, because the folks that work there are just like you and I. We're from Austin. We're eating the barbecue and, going to the east side and having some mezcal. So those people are creatives from the local, market or the local city. So, yeah.
I have a very specific question, so forgive
Sure.
me if it's not generalizable. At my last job, we had a lot of low-grade employees who had to work in a bullpen environment, and I remember recommending that during the next remodel, we implement, say, 2 or 3 soundproof phone booths for their personal conversations.
Sure.
And it wasn't implemented, but it seemed like that would be something a lot of companies, if they were enlightened, would provide. Do you see that? Have you seen that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And Framery is one of the brands that has really great acoustics. But it's also, for one person, it's like $17,000. So when they came out, many others came out after that. And maybe some little things are not as good as Framery, but there's one that's made in China that's like $3,000, and it still does the work. In fact, Amazon, I was visiting the HQ because we do work with them, and they were showing us that they had like a series of 5 different phone booths, and they were testing them out to see how they would perform. And you're right. I mean, it's a growing trend. Everybody wants to, and it's great because you have flexibility, just picking it up and sticking it in a different corner or a different location, maybe outside. Who knows? When you have it built in, like these right here, those are permanent, right? So you can't really change it, and they're not adaptable. So you have to think, what's the need? Is it flexibility, number one, or yeah? So, but they're cool. They're getting up to like 4 and 6 people, so they're like getting bigger. And then you have to think about how you're going to connect, HVAC or conditioning the booth. Otherwise, it's going to be like this hot little box. And then the sprinkler lines also have to be the head, and it needs to go and turn down. So, but they're great. It's such a cool little innovation. And, who knows what's going to be prompt after that? What else, I don't know. We'll see what technology pushes. It'll be interesting. Cool. Anybody else? Yeah.
I'm curious if you work in any healthcare settings. I've been an operating room nurse for the last 6 years, and I'm transitioning out. But one thing that your presentation reminded me of is our issue with fluorescent lighting.
Mm-hmm.
We have lights that are 100,000 lumen, and it's pretty obvious to me that, there are studies that say they cause sleep disturbance. And so I'm super curious about if you guys work with healthcare.
We have done some. We don't have a huge practice that's focused just on that. But I can tell you this, because my prior firm did healthcare, a lot of hospitals. That's changing. People are realizing how it affects you. And I've been in hospitals. I've been there when I gave birth to my child. It was absolutely the worst experience I ever had. And that was locally. And, it was the fluorescent lighting. And if you don't have that fluorescent lighting, it's another light off of the side, from the bathroom. And so that's going to change. LEDs are going to be the way to go. And they're so much more cost effective. They have, like 30,000 hours. And people have to demand it. That's kind of what happens in universities or anything else for that matter. If the space doesn't have the attributes where you're feeling like it's comfortable, and especially in healthcare, whether you're sick or you're having a baby or something basic, that space needs to be conducive of wellness, right? And and hospitals are notorious for not having that. And I think food-wise, there's the other place. You go to a hospital to get better, right? But the food is absolutely the worst. And I think that's where, somehow by the public pushing that, I think it's going to start to change. But yeah, that's coming. So, yeah. One last question over there? How are we doing with time? 8:17. Oh, we got time.
Hi. You shared some sort of tactics and how you design for collaboration.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts of how you design for deep work?
For like quiet work.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, the key for quiet work or hands down work is really about avoiding distractions and acoustical sounds coming in. So, trying to think, for Facebook, we did some rooms that, meditation rooms, by the way, is another one. Quiet rooms are really just becoming a huge part of every space. It's no longer a mother's room. It's now a wellness room where the mother can actually have a window outside, because usually they try to lump them into the center core because of the plumbing access. But it's starting to change. We're starting to, people are saying, hey, just because you give me a room doesn't mean it functions in the best of its ability. But we think about ways of laying out the space to where you can isolate those areas. Absolutely. Everybody needs some of that downtime. And for Google, the team, we had created a bunk bed in some of these little corners, so you didn't even know it existed until you kind of went around and you're going, whoa. And it has a big photo of Marfa, and it's really cool, but you're creating these little spots that are, for quiet time, and that's very important. So yeah, that's very much in the design process. Well, thank you guys. Wow, I had no expected so many questions. So I love what I do. I'm very passionate about it, and whatever one can do to make a space, inspire somebody. It's really cool to walk in at the end and go, wow, look at this space. Remember when we were starting, and here we are. It's done. So it's cool. Thank you.
Jordan, if everybody has a second, Jordan has a wonderful new program that's coming online. I don't know if Vasca also. So these are two of our volunteers, and this may be something of a lot of interest to folks.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. That was so awesome. I'm Jordan. This is Baskin. And we actually met a month or two ago at an action design event, and we're inspired to start a special interest group within action design geared toward mental health focused research and design around Austin. So if you are a researcher or designer working in the mental health sphere, or are interested in just talking about it and learning more, we're going to start up some happy hours and panels and speaking events in the coming months. So come on up after, and we can get you on the email list or answer any more questions, and Baskin will say something. Here you
go. Yeah, I got inspired in this space several months ago, and I'm making a lot of changes in my life, trying to go down this road. The Happiness Lab was a podcast that kind of inspired me, and the area of positive psychology, things that we can do to not fix problems. We're not we're not in a therapy space, but for net normal people, how do we improve our lives through all sorts of ways? The Byline and Happiness podcast is our minds are always trying to tell us how to be happy, but they might be lying to us. So looking at the research in that space is really interesting, and so if anybody is interested in that space, come and talk to us, and we're going to start a group in that endeavor to answer some questions or ask a lot of questions.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Second Mondays of every month, we also have a mixer. So if you were on your way to finding your perfect co-founder for your next startup, or really just want to nerd out with us on anything in the cognitive science realm, or psychology, or anything in behavioral economics, etc. feel free to join us. That's out on Meetup as well under our groups. So if you enjoy this, if you could share any of this with friends, post it on Facebook. We'll on Meetup we'll post a link to the web recording of this that'll be on YouTube here a little bit later. Okay, all right. Thank you all for attending tonight. I appreciate it.